Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, Israeli forces ramp up their assault on Hezbollah, launching a major bombing campaign in Lebanon. Meanwhile, residents in Lebanon are left shaken, not knowing whether their phones might explode in their pockets. Jason Perry reports. Federal authorities are warning of efforts to sow division in the U.S. and efforts to influence the upcoming elections. The FBI says Iranian hackers sent stolen material from the Trump campaign to Biden campaign staff. Jeremy Sandberg has reactions from presidential campaigns. Hot on the campaign trail, former President Trump will speak about fighting anti-Semitism tonight in the nation's capital. Jack Bradley gives us a preview of the event. That's as Vice President Kamala Harris will participate in a live stream with Oprah Winfrey, who endorsed Harris in August. The event is meant to highlight dozens of grassroots groups backing Harris. In probing the impact illegal immigration has on terrorism in the U.S., Congress questions witnesses to assess possible threats to the homeland. Arian Pazdar has the highlights.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Israeli forces have picked up the intensity against Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon, launching airstrikes on multiple targets. Meanwhile, Lebanese residents share mixed emotions after explosions from communication devices injured thousands. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest.
On Thursday, Israeli forces released video of two Hezbollah terrorists planting explosives near the Israeli border. Then the sound of gunfire rang out, forcing the two terrorists to try to take cover. And soon after, an Israeli drone fired on them. Also on Thursday, the Israeli Air Force struck several Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, including terrorist infrastructure sites that contained about 150 launcher barrels ready to fire projectiles towards Israel. The Israel Defense Forces also reported striking terrorist infrastructure sites and weapons facilities in southern Lebanon. Israel's intense operations in Lebanon come just a day after Hezbollah communication devices exploded for 2 days in a row, something Israel has not claimed responsibility for. Residents in Lebanon are expressing fear and uncertainty, not knowing whether their phones may explode in their pockets.
Of course we're scared. My children, my siblings' children, all of us. Who can even secure their phone now? When I heard about what happened yesterday, I left my phone on my motorcycle and walked away.
However, opinions are mixed in Lebanon on how they should respond after about 3,000 people were injured when communication devices exploded across the country. Lebanon's foreign minister said this on Thursday.
We are against war in Lebanon. The government of Lebanon does not want war and does not want even the skirmishes in the south of Lebanon.
Meanwhile, the leader of the Iran-backed terrorist group in Lebanon blamed Israel for causing Hezbollah pagers to explode, and he said it will be met with a just punishment. He also said the Lebanese front will not stop before the aggression on Gaza stops. The Hezbollah leader also appeared to be in good health, as many were wondering whether he had been injured during the device explosions. And on that same day, even after the bombing campaign by Israeli forces, Hezbollah terrorists launched missiles and attacked drones into Israel. 2 people were injured and taken to a hospital for treatment, according to an Israeli hospital official. Also on Thursday, family members of hostages in the Gaza Strip said they don't want war with Hezbollah. They also called for a ceasefire with the Hamas terrorist group and the return of their loved ones. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The FBI says Iranian hackers reached out to people associated with President Biden's campaign before he ended his re-election bid. Federal authorities say the hackers sent information stolen from the Trump campaign to Biden staffers. They said there is no indication that any of Biden's staff replied. Federal agencies say it's part of a wider effort to interfere with the upcoming general election. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has reactions from the Trump and Harris campaigns.
The FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies laid out details of an Iranian cyber attack in June and July on Wednesday. A joint statement says Iranian hackers sent unsolicited emails to Biden campaign staffers with a short text of material stolen from the Trump campaign. The agencies say the hackers stole the non-public material using cyber breaches. They say the hack is one of several efforts by foreign actors to sow discord and undermine elections in the U.S. That includes a previous failed attempt to hack the Biden-Harris campaign. The statement says the Chinese regime and Russia are also increasing efforts to influence the election. The Trump campaign in a statement urged the Biden administration to clarify whether they used the hacked material. A Harris campaign spokeswoman said it's not aware of any material being sent directly to the campaign. She says a few individuals were targeted on personal emails in what looked like a spam or phishing attempt. A campaign official said the material was not used. Authorities warn Iranian hackers are still trying to send stolen Trump campaign information to U.S. media outlets. The FBI says it's been tracking the activity and been in contact with victims. It says it will pursue and disrupt the threat actors responsible. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Tonight, former President Trump is campaigning in our nation's capital. The event focuses on fighting anti-Semitism in America. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
On the heels of the one-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack on Israel, former President Trump is holding an event here just blocks away from the Capitol building at the Hyatt in D.C. Now, the event features multiple speakers, including Jewish leaders from all walks of life. Later tonight, Trump is a featured speaker at the Israeli-American Council's National Summit, which is America's largest pro-Israel conference of the year. That's expecting to draw about 4,000 people. Biden and Harris were invited to speak, but are not expected to attend. This comes days after a second apparent assassination attempt on Trump. The suspect in that made anti-Israel posts on social media. In 2019, Trump signed an executive order to combat anti-Semitism. It enforces civil rights laws to protect Jewish Americans from discrimination and harassment. The Uncommitted movement said Thursday that it will not endorse a candidate. Now, this group sprung up earlier this year during the Democratic primaries. They're in opposition to the Biden administration's military aid to Israel during the war. Now, this could impact votes in key battleground states in Michigan, which has a large Palestinian population. Now, right across the street from us is the Teamsters Union headquarters, which, of course, did not endorse a candidate this year, a first since 1996. The head of the Teamsters Union spoke at the Republican National Convention this year, but not at the Democratic National Convention, which was an odd move, as the unions have been known to endorse Democratic presidential candidates. Now, Trump this weekend will be at a rally in Wilmington, North Carolina. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Kamala Harris will be joining Oprah Winfrey in the swing state of Michigan for a 2-hour discussion event. The talk will be streamed online and is aimed at energizing Harris's core base and swaying undecided voters. NTD's Jason Blair has more.
The event is called Unite for America and is being held in Detroit on Thursday night. Michigan is a blue wall state that is considered crucial for Harris to win in November. 400 people are expected to be in the audience and thousands more watching online on platforms like YouTube and Twitch. The organizers say the event will highlight dozens of grassroots groups that are backing Harris. And after the news of the Teamsters Union not endorsing a presidential candidate this year, the Harris campaign was quick to tout a list of local Teamster councils who have officially endorsed Harris and Walz. Some other major unions have already endorsed Harris, such as the United Auto Workers Union and the AFL-CIO. The Teamsters head organization has a history of primarily endorsing Democrats. The last time they didn't make an endorsement was in 1996. And along with their announcement, Teamsters released data from a poll among their members that showed Trump is favored over Harris by a sizable 30 points. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Congress today again investigating the immigration crisis at our southern border. The focus of today's hearing, the impact illegal immigration has on the terrorism threat in the U.S. NTD's Arian Pazdar has what lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are saying.
It only takes one terrorist to perform an extreme act of violence. The House Homeland Security Committee on Thursday, probing the impact illegal immigration has on terror threats in the U.S. Multiple Republicans spoke about illegal immigrants who show up on the terror watch list. The number of such encounters has gone up from 11 during the Trump administration to almost 400 during the Biden administration so far.
From your time working as a military advisor in DHS to now, what has changed?
In my opinion, it is the change of policy that has emboldened the terrorists to come to our borders more so than they ever have before.
Congressman Morgan Luttrell is a former Navy SEAL. He pointed to his military background, saying the U.S. has to do everything possible to keep out potential terrorists.
If we don't do everything, that one thing we don't do is going to get us killed.
Do you want to spend 100% of U.S. GDP on counterterrorism?
Okay. I don't know if you know my background or not, or that man sitting over there, but our job was to do everything, period. And that's why we were 99.9% successful.
Now, many Democrats at Thursday's hearing suggested that illegal immigration does not increase the risk of terrorist attacks. And some of them also alleged fear-mongering by Republicans, including former President Trump. Congressman Lou Correa says the threat of terrorism actually comes from within the U.S.
Most terrorist activity is conducted by United States citizens. DHS and FBI regularly tell us that one of the greatest terrorism threats we have is domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism.
One of his colleagues mentioned an alleged rise in violent crime caused by illegal immigrants. He showed a graph depicting the number of homicides in the U.S. over recent decades.
And this is data collected by police departments and the FBI and others. Do you agree that the country is safer today as it relates to homicides than in the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to point out the immigrant population is substantially higher today, too.
He added that his graph also shows that there was a spike in homicides in 2022 while Trump was president. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Authorities said today an Alaska man has been arrested for allegedly sending graphic threats to injure and kill 6 Supreme Court justices and their family members. He's been indicted on federal charges. Panos Anastasio is accused of sending over 450 threatening messages through a public court website. These included graphic threats of assassination, torture, along with racist and homophobic language. The indictment does not specify which justices were targeted. The Attorney General said he made these threats in retaliation for decisions he didn't agree with. Anastasio has been charged with 22 counts, including making threats against a federal judge and through interstate commerce. He was arrested yesterday. Lawmakers in the House and Senate are pushing through their last legislative actions before the October recess. They have only until then to fund the government or face a shutdown during an election year. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
House Republicans held 3 hearings examining the impact of the Biden-Harris administration. The Energy and Commerce, Oversight and Accountability and Budget Committees held full-member hearings.
The hearing today will focus on the cost and consequences of the Biden-Harris energy agenda.
3.5 years ago, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took office, they promised to build back better. But 3.5 years later, the economy is suffering, the border is broken, and crises continue to erupt worldwide.
On the other hand, House Democrats introduced legislation that has no hope of seeing a vote in the House floor. Congressman Joseph Neguse of Colorado introduced a bill opposing Project 2025, while Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal introduced a bill to restore funding to UNRWA, the controversial UN agency operating in Gaza, accused of having links with Hamas. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has yet to unveil his Plan B after his proposal of a continuing resolution with the SAVE Act attached failed to pass on the House floor on Wednesday night.
And so now we go back to the playbook, we'll draw up another play, and we'll come up with a solution. I'm already talking to colleagues about their many ideas. We have time to fix the situation, and we'll get right to it. I'm disappointed. I know this was the right thing to do.
And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer filed cloture on Thursday on the Senate's own version of a continuing resolution that would see government funded through December 13th of this year.
Democrats and Americans don't want a Trump shutdown. I dare say most Republicans, at least in this chamber, don't want to see a Trump shutdown. And the American people certainly don't want their elected representatives in Washington creating a shutdown for the sake of Donald Trump's ridiculous claims, when it's clear he doesn't even know how the legislative process works.
It's important to note that House Republicans have already passed 6 out of the 12 appropriation bills to fund government through fiscal year 2025. Senate Democrats have refused to pick up any of the bills passed by House Republicans. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Legal warfare, a tactic the Chinese Communist Party uses to silence its critics right here in the U.S. House lawmakers today analyzed the scope and impact of how the Chinese regime weaponizes the rule of law. NTD's congressional correspondent Melina Weisskopf reports.
Our liberties terrify the CCP. This is because the Chinese people that the party rules with an iron grip could look at our freedoms and demand them for themselves.
It's well known that the Chinese Communist Party suppresses its own citizens who even face jail time or worse if they dissent. Less known is the fact that the CCP is using our own legal system to censor Americans.
Which was a deep dive on China's biotechnology ecosystem. BGI's letter accused me of defamation, asked me and CISA to retract my paper, say I was wrong, and stop discussing this analysis.
The paper, written under her role at Georgetown, lawmakers raised an eyebrow at why the university is not stepping up to the plate to defend her.
It's incredibly chilling for academic speech, I would imagine.
And her case is one of several.
Paul, they not only attempt to scare him from speaking out, but they are also trying to scare American companies from even doing business with him. Using the law as a sword in filing these suits, but then they're using the law as a shield to protect themselves from.
How are they able to get away with this?
Well, part of it is, they exploit their economic power to hire white shoe law firms to threaten people like Ms. Puglisi, to cow Georgetown University, to pressure the NBA into going after its own players and coaches instead of supporting the right of free speech.
Even as the CCP launches legal warfare against Americans inside America, the communist regime makes it impossible to fight back by refusing to provide evidence.
American attorneys can be arrested for taking depositions in China. Isn't that right, Dr. Goldenseal?
That is correct, and the U.S. State Department has put out a warning to this effect.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Is there a political shift happening among union workers in the U.S.? Yesterday, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the largest labor unions in America, announced it will not endorse a presidential candidate this year. This is the first time since 1996 that they have not endorsed the Democratic candidate. The announcement came after internal Teamster polling showed a dramatic shift in support towards former President Donald Trump. He was behind President Biden earlier this year, but yesterday's polling showed him ahead of Harris by around 25 percentage points. Joining us now to discuss this and the shifting sentiment among union workers is Jeff Cruer, political analyst and host of the radio and TV show Ringside Politics. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. To begin, how significant do you think this is? Are we seeing a notable shift here?
Yes, thanks for having me. I really do think there has been since Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump has really sort of refashioned the Republican Party into more of a working class party. He talks about, bringing in manufacturing jobs and building up our economy and bringing jobs back from other countries. So he's really focusing on the working man and woman. And that's really what you think of when you think of unions as being, working class, out for the workers' rights. And it was shocking to see the poll numbers. It were almost 2-1 for Trump among Teamster members. That just really shows you how things have shifted. I mean, historically, Democrats have owned the unions. Democrats have had all union support, and Republicans were considered the party of the elite, Wall Street. But really, things are in the process, I think, of completely changing.
And expanding on that, Teamsters internal polling showed majority support for Trump. About 60% of members believe the union should endorse Trump, while 34% supported Harris. Now, back in 2020, the union's internal polling showed majority support for Biden. Harris was, of course, part of that ticket as his vice president. What do you think accounts for this shift between then and now?
Well, I think the last 4 years. I mean, I think there's been a real difficulty for many union members, along with many other Americans, to get by in this economic situation. So I think as the economy really has been the number one issue, that has hit union members just as hard as other Americans. And when you look at all of the illegal immigration that we've had in the country, that has also been a threat to, working class folks who feel like that could threaten their jobs. So you've got the immigration issue, you've got the economic issue, and then you've got the different ways the parties are addressing voters. And I think a lot of union members now just feel more comfortable with a Trump-led Republican Party. Now, if you go back and look at Romney or Bush, it's going to be a totally different situation, I think, than what you have with Donald Trump. So this could be just tailored to Donald Trump, or we'll see what happens, going forward, whether that's going to be the direction the Republican Party goes in, or if it reverts back to a more traditional type of establishment Republican nominee.
And now the Teamsters is only one of several major labor unions. The United Auto Workers and the American Federation of Teachers, among others, are supporting Harris. Now, is what we're seeing with Teamsters likely to have any real impact when it comes to the election and how union members ultimately decide to vote?
There's always been a disconnect between union bosses and union members. And I think that's really the appeal of a lot of folks who support right to work. They don't necessarily join a union. They don't want their dues going to a political cause that they don't believe in. So I think you've got this, the union bosses are still mostly with the Democrats, except, of course, for the Teamsters decision. And a lot of the rank and file across America, union members, more affiliate with Donald Trump. So I think you're going to see that in the election. I think that's going to continue, that sort of a trend. And then we'll see what happens afterwards as far as how the parties realign. But, one interesting thing I would just throw out, I bet that if the poll numbers among the rank and file showed a 2-to-1 support for Harris, the union would have endorsed Harris. So I think the fact that the rank and file supported Trump so much was the reason that they decided not to make an endorsement. I think the easier thing for a union to do, whether it's the Teamsters or any of them, is really to endorse the Democratic candidate. It takes a lot for them not to endorse, or especially to endorse a Republican.
Jeff Cruier, political analyst and host of the radio and TV show Ringside Politics. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The U.S. Coast Guard continues hearing testimony on the Titan submersible. OceanGate's chief scientist was the latest to testify. NTD's David Lamb reports.
The Titan submersible's scientific director said that the vessel had a platform issue prior to the fatal dive in June last year.
The rest of the passengers tumbled about. I ended up standing on the rear bulkhead. One passenger was hanging upside down. Well, as I said, it was uncomfortable and unpleasant, and it took considerable time to correct the problem. There were multiple issues that the surface team was having to deal with.
This, as previous witnesses said the Titan had imperfections and wasn't properly certified. Newly released footage shows the experimental vessel created by OceanGate, which is believed to have imploded during a deep-sea dive. In the foreground, a piece of carbon fiber can be seen beside the tail cone. The footage also includes the aft dome, aft ring, remnants of the hull, and carbon fiber debris. According to the Department of Defense, the footage confirmed the death of all 5 on board the vessel, including OceanGate's CEO. Prior testimony claimed that OceanGate had questionable business practices and said the Titan was unsafe. One witness said the passengers were passionate and that OceanGate was transparent about the experimental dive.
Nobody was really nervous. They were excited about what they're going to see, make sure you have your camera, that type of thing.
I was learning a lot. I was working with amazing people. Some of those people are the very hardworking individuals that were just trying to make dreams come true.
They were traveling to see the shipwreck of the Titanic, which sank in 1912. The Coast Guard will continue its public hearing on Friday. David Lamb, NTD News.
Authorities in Kentucky believe the 11-day manhunt for the I-75 shooter is over. A couple assisting in the search for Joseph Couch found a body in deep brush off the interstate. They were live streaming on YouTube at the time they found the body and had been tipped off by vultures circling overhead. Police in Laurel County say Couch opened fire near the interstate on September 7th. 5 people were shot, but fortunately all survived. Since then, search teams have been trying to locate Couch. Early in the search, they located the AR-15 rifle they believed was used in the shooting, as well as the suspect's vehicle. The body will be sent for identification. A new report says the U.S. ranks last in key health care measures compared to 9 other high-income nations. This despite spending more on health care than any other country. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more about the findings.
The U.S. ranks the lowest among 10 developed nations in critical areas of health care. The study released by the Commonwealth Fund highlights the country's lower life expectancy and higher rates of preventable deaths and diseases in the U.S. compared to others. The top performing countries in key healthcare measures were Australia, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom, while the U.S. fell behind in critical areas such as access to care, equity, and administrative efficiency. Research evaluated health systems in 5 key areas: access to care, care processes, administrative efficiency, equity, and health outcomes. Dr. Joseph Betancourt, president of the Commonwealth Fund, pointed out significant gaps in the U.S. healthcare system. He noted that Americans often die younger and experience more avoidable deaths despite high spending. Betancourt said, "We spend the most and get the least for our investment." He pointed to unaffordable medications and delayed care due to insurance denials. Currently, over 20 million Americans remain uninsured, making up about 7 to 8% of the population. The U.S. also ranked second to last in equity. Lawrence Gostin of the O'Neill Institute noted that racial minorities and low-income individuals are often uninsured or underinsured, leading them to delay necessary care due to costs. Many countries have simplified their health insurance and payment systems through legislation and standardization. Standardized payments allow for clear financial responsibilities at the time of service. Last year, life expectancy rose to 77.5 years in the United States, recovering from a pandemic-related low of 76.4 years in 2021. The United States ranked last or near last in most categories except for one: the care process. That means the health care delivered here could be considered high quality. The report also listed solutions to the country's health care problems, including lowering the cost of care and expanding access to coverage. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. Former President Trump is campaigning in Washington, D.C. tonight. He's holding an event about fighting anti-Semitism in the U.S. and is expected to speak soon. Vice President Kamala Harris participating in a live stream with Oprah Winfrey tonight. Winfrey endorsed Harris and spoke at the Democratic Convention in August. The 2-hour Unite for America streaming session will take place in the swing state of Michigan. The FBI says Iranian hackers reached out to people associated with President Biden's campaign before he ended his re-election bid. Federal authorities say the hackers sent information stolen from the Trump campaign to Biden staffers. They said there's no indication that any of Biden's staff replied. Federal agencies say it's part of a wider effort to interfere with the upcoming general election. Israel and Hezbollah engaged in cross-border strikes as Lebanon reels from deadly back-to-back attacks targeting their electronic devices, including pagers and handheld radios. The attacks left dozens dead and thousands injured. And joining us now to discuss the conflicts in the Middle East and Iran's attempts to interfere in U.S. elections is Tommy Waller. He's the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. He's also served as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps. Tommy, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, to begin, there's an increasing focus on Iran and its proxy terror groups. This is following the exploding pagers in Lebanon. The FBI confirming yesterday that Iran hacked parts of the Trump campaign and sent that information over to President Biden's campaign. Now, this was back in July when Biden was still running for re-election. How do you read these Iran hacks in terms of the presidential election?
Sure. Yeah. If we want to start with the topic of the Iranian hacks, I mean, ultimately there's a connection between Iran and other adversaries of the United States. We always have to remember that. So they may attribute this to Iran, but it may not be that they were solely involved in such a hack. We know that both Russia and China are also, of course, adversarial to the United States, and that the leaders of those nations, I think personally, and it's a professional opinion of those that work at our nonprofit, that the leaders of Russia and China do not want to see Mr. Trump in the White House again. So there's a connection always between Russia, China, and Iran. The other thing that strikes me is that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism, and that country has been enriched by the Biden administration. And so I just think it's interesting that Iranian hackers, where they would send that information. But, at this point, I think there's also a lot to be looked at with respect to Iran and Israel. And as you mentioned before, that attack that took place in the last 2 days on Hezbollah.
Speaking of that unfolding chaos in Lebanon, the latest was exploding solar panels and walkie-talkies after the first wave of exploding pagers. Now, this is a new type of warfare we're seeing with what some might call low tech as opposed to smartphones, etc. How may other adversarial countries like China be viewing this? Could China wage something similar?
Absolutely. Yeah, Tiffany, I mean, look, at the last 2 days, I've been in touch with internationally acclaimed cyber experts and control system experts and listened to the founder of the Israeli Defense Forces Cyber Division. And all of them said that this was really a first of its kind attack. When you look at the pagers and the different communications devices, that, this was a supply chain attack combined with a cyber attack, because those devices, the supply chain for that had to be interrupted for explosives to be put into it. And then it had to be initiated via a signal. That means cyber. So it's combined cyber physical, and for the first time against human targets in mass. And so that's a big deal. And to your question, Tiffany, like how does that connect to China, right? Well, if we can't trust our supply chain, and now Hezbollah knows it can't trust its own supply chain. If we, the United States, can't trust our supply chain for critical components, especially to our critical infrastructure, that becomes a very significant problem.
And expanding on that, the FBI head Christopher Wray yesterday said the Bureau has disrupted a hacking campaign by the Chinese Communist Party known as Flax Typhoon that had already infected hundreds of thousands of consumer devices and had been lying in wait for years, including in critical infrastructure like water, telecoms, and the electrical grid. The goal seems to be to wreak havoc on the U.S. in case of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. What do you make of this development and the threat that poses?
Yeah, unfortunately, Tiffany, while Director Wray may have talked about Volt Typhoon and a disruption there, what he didn't talk about, and in fact, yesterday was the Aspen Institute's cyber conference. This is members of the White House, Congress, the people who are supposed to be the best cyber experts in the world. There was not a single mention yesterday at that conference of Chinese manufactured transformers, Chinese manufactured port cranes. Like we know right now in the summer of 2019, that a Chinese manufactured transformer was seized at the port of Houston, brought to Sandia National Laboratory, inspected, and a year later, President Trump declared a grid security emergency. Why? Because that supply chain, those transformers, had hardware backdoors placed by China. That's a major problem. And on the first day of the Biden administration, that executive order was suspended, and the number went from 300 to now, our nonprofit tracks this, and the last time we checked, 449 Chinese manufactured transformers in the U.S. grid. How many have hardware backdoors? How many have been placed there in a spot where China could disrupt or turn them off? We don't know. But we're helping states across this nation every single week address this threat because the federal government's not doing enough.
And given this new phase in warfare, if you will, what must the U.S. do now to shore up defenses so something like what unfolded in Lebanon doesn't happen here in the States?
Look, at the end of the day, Tiffany, we need to bring manufacturing back home. We need to have trusted supply chains. It needs to be onshore, nearshore, and with allies, and especially for our most critical components. We think about Americans cannot live without electricity. If we allow the electric grid to go down, it's game over for the United States. And the Chinese know that. It's literally in unrestricted warfare. I can tell you the page number, right? And that's the People Liberation Army colonels that wrote that decades ago. And it's exactly what China's doing. And at the federal level, Tiffany, we're not even in the game when it comes to addressing that threat. And so thank goodness at the state level, there are leaders stepping up and we are helping them every week.
Tommy Waller, President and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany, for having me on.
Israel's prime minister has accused the British government of sending mixed signals over its support for Israel and undermining the country's right to self-defense. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more from London.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the previous British government was clear in its support of Israel following the October 7th attack, but accused the new administration of sending mixed signals. Speaking to the Daily Mail, Netanyahu said the British government says Israel has rights to defend itself, but undermines this by blocking arms sales and dropping plans to challenge the International Criminal Court's application for arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his defense minister. The UK suspended around 30 of some 350 arms contracts with Israel earlier this month over concerns the arms could be used to violate international humanitarian law amid the Gaza conflict. But Netanyahu said the move sends a horrible message, highlighting it came days after Hamas terrorists executed 6 Israeli hostages. He also said if the arrest warrants are issued against the leaders of the only Middle Eastern democracy, it'll compromise the ability of all democracies in the world to fight terrorism. A British Foreign Office spokesperson said they are clear Israel must adhere to international humanitarian law when exercising its right to self-defense, adding that the UK's priority is a ceasefire in Gaza, hostages released, civilians protected, and aid to the region. Netanyahu meanwhile reaffirmed Israel is determined to defeat Hamas. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A new set of polls find the 2024 election is in deadlock, but according to Gallup, Trump edges over Harris by a 2% margin. Given the inconsistency, do voters trust the polls? NTD's Sam Wong was out at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. to hear from them.
Me personally, I don't trust the polls, but that doesn't dictate how I'm going to vote anyways. I just think they're trying to cause more division.
Why don't we trust the polls? Because we see it all the time. Is the news media sides to one side or the other side? They focus whatever side they want to win is the side that they focus on.
I just trust people I talk to, and I live in a very conservative state, so most people there are for Trump.
Yeah, I trust the polls because it's each individual's out there giving their opinion.
I think of the polls like an NBA game. Like, it really all comes down to the fourth quarter, because in a game you can get stressed the score's going up and down and it's so close, but really don't know what's going to happen into those last few minutes.
The way the stats work out, it doesn't really work out election night. I remember 2016, everyone was favoring Clinton, and then that election night it turned different.
How important are polls to you when it comes to deciding who to vote for?
I think it's just a way to turn people that don't actually pay attention.
I think there's a whole lot of silent majority out there for Trump.
I don't think polls matter that much to me, because I'm not going to let other people's opinions dictate who I vote for. I think the facts matter more to me.
And it really, at the end of the day, just matters who shows up on Election Day.
So do you think polls are reflective of the general public's opinion when it comes to the election?
I think it can be, and I think also it has to be taken with a grain of salt, right? Because while it does reflect the general public, it also reflects the portion of the public that is ready to present their opinion.
They can, but it's not like a one-size-fits-all. So I think right now there is some reflection, but it's not over yet.
Well, it depends the way they ask the question and who they are polling.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in college football as the #1 ranked Texas Longhorns announced that backup quarterback Arch Manning will start on Saturday. Now, did they give a timeline of how long until Quinn Ewers returns?
No, I mean, he's listed as questionable. Technically, I think they said day to day, but he has that abdominal strain that was from last Saturday's game. It really wasn't by any contact. He just threw a long pass on one play. The next play, he hands off the ball, immediately falls to the ground in pain, but he was able to walk off in his own power. Now, Texas, they're in the very enviable position of having two very good quarterbacks. They can take Ewers out and replace him with another good one, albeit unproven, Arch Manning. Now, Manning was a big-time recruit 2 years ago. This is a nephew of Peyton Manning and Eli Manning. He played great in relief of Ewers on Saturday, throwing 4 touchdown passes. And this Saturday's opponent is Louisiana Monroe. They're not a ranked opponent. So it's kind of considered a good opportunity for Arch Manning to start in a somewhat low expectation game, I guess.
Moving to baseball news, the New York Yankees clinched a playoff berth last night with their win in Seattle. What are their postseason expectations?
Yeah, for the Yankees, it's win the World Series. I mean, this is the Yankees. They've won more titles than anyone else, 27. No other team, only one team has more than 10, is the St. Louis Cardinals with 11. I think it's realistic for this team, too. You know, they've surprised me, particularly if they're starting pitching. Once Garrett Cole went down in, like, spring training, I thought they were going to be in serious trouble because it didn't look like they had much other starting pitching. But their starting pitching has been great. You know, Nestor Cortez and Luis Gil have been very good. Meanwhile, their offense, it may be just two great hitters in Aaron Judge and Juan Soto, but they're pretty much the best two hitters in the American League. I mean, this is almost like when they had Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig all those years. You know, Judge may not break his home run record of 62, but 53 is obviously very good. Soto's not far behind, and Soto, like last year with Ohtani, Soto is going to get a huge contract. It's just going to be a matter of from which team.
Well, speaking of Shohei Ohtani, he stole his 49th base last night in the Dodgers win over Miami, so he needs just one more steal and 2 more home runs to make history as the first player with 50 of each.
Yeah, you know, actually, he just got his 50th stolen base just a few minutes ago, so he is now 2 home runs shy. But I would say the 50th home run is going to be the hardest. You remember 2 years ago when Judge broke the home run record with 62? He hit number 60 with like 15 games left. It looked like he was going to go blow past 60, but he actually went into a little bit of a slump. I mean, when you're only thinking about hitting a home run, all eyes on you, it's much more difficult to do. I mean, that's just human nature. Ohtani, though, he's got 10 games left, counting today, to be the first 50-50 guy. On paper, it certainly looks like he has more than enough time to do it. I also think it helps that the Dodgers haven't quite clinched, but they can clinch with a win today. So we'll see how that goes.
Shifting gears to the NFL, the Jets play the Patriots tonight on Thursday Night Football. Now, this is a rivalry that's really been dominated by New England under Bill Belichick, but it appears the tables may be turning. You know, now that Belichick is gone, and conversely, the Jets have what looks like a healthy Aaron Rodgers, yeah, it could be the tables are turning in the Jets' favor, but you never know in this series. You know, this has been quite a rivalry. It really starts when Belichick was an assistant with the Jets under Bill Parcells. Now, Parcells wanted Belichick to replace him as head coach when he retired, which happened to be at the same time that the Patriots wanted Belichick to be their coach. It was this really bizarre then press conference where the Jets were sent to introduce Belichick as their head coach. He ended up resigning right on the spot, instead going to the Patriots. And so then he goes to the Patriots, drafts some unknown quarterback. A few months later, it turns out to be Tom Brady in the 6th round. But Brady sits on the bench for like the first year and a half until the starter, that's Drew Bledsoe, gets nailed by Jets defensive end Mo Lewis in their game. So he inserts Brady, and then 6 Super Bowl titles later, they have absolutely dominated the Jets in every area, and that, of course, includes the infamous butt fumble game by Mark Sanchez. But tonight's game starts at 8:15, and that'll be on Amazon Prime. Well, Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. To round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.